Hello, I'm Kathy Foley. I'm a member of the UNIMA board. I want to thank all of you who've taken time out from your Sunday afternoon. I want to invite, if there's any of you who are not already members of UNIMA-USA, invite you to become a member. And over the course of this short hour thing, hopefully we will cover some of the ways UNIMA-USA and UNIMA International can be useful to you if you're not a member. So just contact the office or just do UNIMA-USA and you'll easily be able to join. I want to thank Sara Burmenko, who is doing the tech on this, and to explain a little bit why we are doing this session. As part of the World Encyclopedia of Puppetry Arts, we are hoping to update and add to some of the history of puppetry in the US. So what I'm going to be presenting today will give you a sense of the kinds of research people have been doing so that American puppetry, both to us ourselves, our history, and to others, can be made transparent. When you Google a name, WEPA, World Encyclopedia of Puppetry Arts, comes up quickly. So it's useful for our international friends who want to know what is going on in the US and what its past has been. If anyone gets inspired to write about some of our wonderful past puppeteers in America, just let me and Carol Smith, who is in charge of WEPA, know. We would love to have your input. Housekeeping business. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A. The way that we are going to go today is right now I'm going to introduce everyone who's doing very short presentations on some of our founders and their fields. We'll go directly from one to the other in the order that I state. And then at the end, we will call everybody back on screen. And at that point in time, we will look for the Q&A questions that you have and any comments and be reading those off in the last few minutes before we call it a Sunday afternoon. So this is Puppet People, Founders in the Field, our wonderful presenters. I thank them. Our Will Bixby, who will be speaking on Ellen von Valkenburg, the mother of American puppets. He's a puppeteer, a scholar, an actor who has worked with King Street Players in Missouri and other companies. He's currently a PhD student at Northwestern Interdisciplinary Theater and Drama Program, and his research interest is puppetry. The second presenter will be Bradford Clark, who will speak on Nancy Staub. He's a professor at Bowling Green State University, teaches theater, design, and puppetry. He served on the UNIMA-USA board, Henson Foundation board. He's curator for the 2015 expansion of the Worlds of Puppetry Museum at the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta. The final presentation will be by yours truly. It will be Carol Sterling as the candidate I'll be speaking about. I'm a research professor at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I've been on the UNIMA-USA board. I'm on the Heritage and Publication Commission of WEPA and UNIMA International, and am working to try and get better coverage of our puppeteers in the USA. So those are the people who are coming, and I'm calling on screen right now Will Bixby, who will then pass it over at the end to Brad Clark.
All right, let me go ahead and get my screen shared. Excellent. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Today I'm going to chat about Ellen Van Valkenburg, her contributions to the American puppetry movement, and also show a few archival images that I gathered when I was doing my research at the University of Michigan's Special Collections. So Ellen Nellie Van Valkenburg was an American actress, director, teacher, and puppeteer who helped usher along the puppet revival in the early 20th century United States. Valkenburg was a self-proclaimed natural theatrical, and she performed in a number of amateur and college theatrical productions in her youth. And she even reportedly had the ability to recreate a stage production, the lines, the characterization, all the stage business, after having seen the show only one time, earning her this write-up in a local newspaper that called her the most remarkable girl in Chicago. While she was discouraged by her family from pursuing a professional acting career, instead, when she was young, she performed her interpretations and reenactments of modern plays as parlor entertainments for wealthy families in Chicago and in parts of Michigan. So it's clear that Valkenburg had a knack for the theatrical arts. She had a deep understanding and passion for dramatic production, and so it stands to reason that when she came across fellow theater aficionado, the director, writer, and designer Maurice Brown here on the left, that the two would hit it off. And hit it off they did. The two met in Florence in 1910 and were married 4 days later. Although they did divorce in 1922, they remained close theatrical and educational collaborators. One of the most prominent collaborations came about in 1912 when Brown and Valkenburg formed the Chicago Little Theater. Now, it'd be easy to talk about the Chicago Little Theater all afternoon, but we don't have time for that. So just briefly, I'll say that the Little Theater was a response against the commercial theater of the time. They opted instead to create a smaller, lower budget art theater productions. The two converted a small room on the fourth floor of the Fine Arts Building on Michigan Avenue into a 91-seat theater where they produced 44 plays in its 5-year existence. It covered Greek tragedy, Russian symbolist plays, and modernist playwrights such as George Bernard Shaw. In the image on the right here, we can see an illustration of what the Chicago Little Theater interior looked like. Seats here and the stage up in the front. These images here are a couple of stills from some of the Chicago Little Theater's productions. On the left is the Trojan Women with Valkenburg in the center. On the right is Shaw's The Philanderer with Valkenburg here on the right and Maurice Brown opposite her. Now, the Chicago Little Theater aspired to these high artistic values and embraced new, non-representational aesthetics and staging that utilized simplicity and suggestion. And Maurice Brown described the mission of the theater as the creation of a new plastic and rhythmic drama in America. While the Chicago Little Theater ultimately closed in 1917, they galvanized the Little Theater movement that took hold across the United States. And alongside their interest in these modernist staging and non-representational aesthetics came a turn towards puppetry. Valkenburg had long held an interest in puppetry, but it was really at the behest of a fellow Little Theater company member, Harriet Edgerton, who wanted to explore puppetry plays for children that kickstarted Valkenburg's practical experimentation with the form. Edgerton funded a trip across Europe where Valkenburg experienced a variety of puppetry, but when it was watching a small living room marionette show that was produced by two German puppeteers known as the Janssen sisters, Valkenburg was enraptured by the magic and the high art production and was convinced to try puppets of her own. So she returned to Chicago with a sample marionette that she purchased in Germany and formed a small all-women puppetry troupe of volunteer performers, including sculptor Kathleen Wheeler and puppeteers Hetty Louise Mick and Harriet Edgerton herself. And throughout the Chicago Little Theater's time, Valkenburg directed 6 puppet plays, the most impactful being her production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, performed entirely with marionettes. And on the screen are a couple of programs from the puppet plays that Chicago Little Theater did. On the left is Columbine by Reginald Arkell, and on the right, A Midsummer Night's Dream. And in the center here, we have a still from A Midsummer Night's Dream with our puppet Puck posing triumphantly in front of the moon. And Midsummer stands out in many ways. It was the most technically demanding puppet play that was produced at the Chicago Little Theater. It also marks the first puppet production there that wasn't made specifically for children. And I also enjoy it because I think it serves as a good example to unpack Valkenburg's contributions to the American puppet landscape at large. Valkenburg's self-described disarrangement of Shakespeare's comedy all but removed the characters of the Greek lovers and instead focused on the comedy and the whimsy of the rude mechanicals and the fairies, the rude mechanicals we see lined up in a row here. In the original Chicago production, the puppets ranged from 10 to 14-inch figures that were carved from cypress wood by Kathleen Wheeler. And the puppets we see in this image and all the ones that follow are actually from a production Valkenburg did in California some years later in 1924. The figures are slightly larger and carved by a Californian puppeteer named Perry Dilley, but his design is modeled off of Wheeler's original, so they serve as a good representation of what the original production looked like. Now, like I mentioned, Valkenburg did have a German marionette that her and her troupe could use as a model of design and mechanics, but she had no real understanding of the cultural and familial traditions that informed those mechanics. There was no puppet book or cultural marionette heritage for her to pull from, so her and her troupe had to invent one. Her experimentation with puppets was one marked by failure and repetition, a true process of trial and error again and again. Many of her first attempts simply did not succeed. The strings would repeatedly tangle, the joints would come undone, and along with them, the puppet's limbs. And after one particularly disastrous rehearsal, the puppeteer Hetty Louise Mick writes that after Nellie had dried her eyes, she made a decision, which, as I see it, influenced the whole course of puppet history. She decided to work again and make it a good production instead of giving up then and there, as she was tempted to do. And so she kept working at it. And after many experimentations, eventually the troupe moved from a vertical marionette control model to a horizontal or airplane model for greater stabilization of the figures. They added additional joints made of stronger material to ensure that the limbs remained attached. And various strings were tested before black fishing line was discovered to be both technically superior and the best at staying hidden under the stage lights. And speaking of lights, Midsummer was a full-scale production with extensive and expressive lighting design and a group of 5 puppeteers with one offstage assistant to handle the cast of over 30 puppets. And the image on the left here is actually a bit of a backstage look at one of the productions of Midsummer in 1924. Up here, we can see some of the puppeteers and some of the figures that they're dangling on, perhaps one of the assistants or someone who's helping set up the light rigging that we see on the sides. And on the right, I included a sample of one of the lighting plots for the production, just to sort of illustrate the full level of technology and design that went into this production. Now, all of these innovative design technique decisions were born from the vantage of the amateur, trying to get their vision to come to life. Valkenburg's adventure into puppetry marks a spirit of curiosity and a do-it-yourself mentality that's really representative of the American puppet movement of the early 20th century, and quite honestly, a spirit that still exists today. The elaborate lighting design and the immense dedication and care that went into this production shows that Valkenburg treated puppets and puppetry as a theatrical art form worthy of recognition and further exploration. The image we have here, we see a close-up version of Puck standing and dancing perhaps next to Oberon. You can see a little bit clearer the strings that are holding them up, as well as some of the detail that went into the hand-carved face of all of the figures. And then in this next image here, we have on the left a puppeteer holding a dragonfly puppet. We can see a little bit more of the control model and the strings. And then on the right, we see Puck dancing on the knee of a puppeteer. And I include these as well, just because I think it's quite charming to see the marionette figures juxtaposed against the women wearing this 1920s fashion. I think it's quite an interesting image. And another interesting element of Valkenburg's puppetry was her approach to characterization and the puppet itself. So as an actor and a director, Valkenburg had a keen understanding of dramatic feeling. And so when she directed a puppet play, everything started with the character. She was less interested in trick puppets and spectacular mechanics than she was with creating real characters that the audience could believe in. And so to accomplish this, Valkenburg's puppeteers learned the characters that they were playing, and then, as Hetty Louise Mick describes, they would, quote, pour that characterization down the strings to the marionette to bring it to life in a dramatic and kinesthetic sense. And Valkenburg describes this process as synchronization. She says that when I produce, before any of the puppeteers touch a puppet, they train dramatically. They know their parts, they know their characters, their positions. They are trained exactly as if they themselves were going to act the play. They have to know, of course, what the puppets will look like so they can get the feel of them. There must be that synchronization. And this synchronization worked its way into the puppet's voice as well, with Valkenburg's puppeteers all voicing their figures while simultaneously animating them, a practice that was a distinct turn from traditional puppet performance that had those roles split. And Valkenburg's process of synchronization reveals a collaborative spirit between the human and object performers. Just as her puppeteers would pour their characterization down the strings of the marionette, so too would that characterization be informed by the material object at the other end of the line. The movement and the look of the puppets would lead to character traits within performance. A couple examples of that. We see here on the left these two little figures named Wag and Wog that were invented for the Valkenburg performance. They were little bug sprites that would wiggle incessantly as a result of their joints. And this movement led to the puppeteers voicing a slight wiggle, waggle, wiggle, waggle, wiggle, waggle noise that they would do whenever the puppets would bumble across the stage. In the image, you can even see a little bit of that head kind of bobbling with the double exposed eyes and the little movement that it captured. Similarly, the airy sprite Puck over here would tumble and turn in the air with a mischievous flow, which inspired the puppeteer to effect a high-pitched, sprightly laugh on every entrance and exit. Also, we have here an example of the flowy material of the Titania puppet, which informed the lofty and floaty movement of the puppeteer, dragging it across the air so that it would flow, as well as the speech from the puppeteer to have a light, lofty quality to it. Valkenburg understood the puppeteer's role as one that was laboring with the puppet. And in fact, the word puppeteer, a term that Valkenburg coined for the profession, was inspired by the term for a mule driver, a muleteer, illustrating that Valkenburg's understanding of the puppeteer's job was one responding to and guiding these inanimate objects in performance. And then this image here is a nice little capture of Wag, Wog, Bottom, once he's been transformed into a donkey, and Titania on his lap. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Chicago Little Theater closed in 1917, which sent Valkenburg and Brown west, where they formed the drama department in the Cornish School of the Arts in Seattle, where Valkenburg taught acting and puppetry. And Valkenburg actually had a long career of acting, teaching, and directing, and opened several drama schools, some in California, some in London, each with classes dedicated to puppetry. And in his autobiography, Maurice Brown names Valkenburg the mother of American puppets, and it is difficult to dispute that title. Valkenburg and her puppeteers embraced an amateur, do-it-yourself craftsman approach to puppetry that inspired and exemplified the American puppet movement of the early 20th century. Her experimentation with form, her invention of new techniques, and years as a director and educator impacted future generations of puppeteers. But above all, it was Valkenburg's insistence on the dramatic power and theatrical possibilities of the puppet that nourished the spirit of the puppet revival in the United States, a spirit that is still very much alive today. And that is all I have today about Ellen van Valkenburg. So I appreciate everyone listening. And I'm going to go ahead now and hand it off to Brad, who's going to talk about Nancy Staub.
Hello. I think I'll go ahead and show most of my slides towards the end, although I have a few things to show before then. I think a lot of the people who are watching today probably know Nancy personally. She is a person who makes friends wherever she goes, and that has been a very important part of her contribution to puppetry around the world, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. Nancy Lohman Staub has been a champion of puppet theater for most of her life. As an author, researcher, producer, promoter, director, performer, collector, and curator, she has raised public consciousness on all aspects of puppetry and has been pivotal to introducing puppet theater to a wider public than might otherwise have had access to the art form in all its richness. So let me go ahead and share a portrait of Nancy. And, oh, sorry, went back. And this is Nancy Staub with her marionette, which was created for Tony Sarg and is now part of the collection at the Center for Puppetry Arts. Nancy's entire orientation towards puppetry is very international. She attended London's Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, RADA, in the 1950s. And during that time, she saw a performance of Sergei Obraztsov's An Unusual Concert, which in her words, opened my eyes to the incredible potential of puppetry. I have to remember at this time, it was really hard to know much of anything about puppetry outside of the United States. And for that matter, within the United States, people didn't even know that much about each other's puppetry. There was no internet. It was not a subject which was written about extensively. And not everybody had the ability to travel. So one of the things about Obraztsov was that the Unusual Concert was a kind of cabaret act which toured all over the world and was very much part of soft diplomacy in the 1960s, 1950s and the 1960s, and is still very much part of their repertoire. So this had a big, big influence on Nancy because she saw that there were some real possibilities here. Now, in 1954, she founded the Pixie Players, later called the Punchinello Playhouse, in New Orleans, along with Sidney Kittinger. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, so forgive me, Kittinger. After producing puppet shows at the Gallery Circle Theater and Le Petit Theatre, she established the Puppet Playhouse, also in New Orleans, in 1969 and ran it for about 10 years. She toured performances to the New Orleans Recreation Department and to libraries and schools. Now, one of the things that's so important to remember about Nancy, here we go, in 1965 with her daughter, Leslie. One of the things that's really important to remember about Nancy was that she expanded her interest in puppetry through both undergraduate and graduate work. She expanded the scholarly background that she brought to puppetry. She received a BA in philosophy from Tulane University in 1960, an MA in Asian theater and puppetry from the University of Hawaii in 1990. Her studies gave her a scholarly foundation and a knowledge of Asian performance in general, and the historical and religious foundations essential for understanding so much traditional Asian puppetry. I think this is really key. You know, we all come to puppetry from different backgrounds. For some people, it's the love of specific characters. For others, it's the love of the craftsmanship. Nancy has a truly international view of it. She sees puppetry as an expression of culture, an expression of history, as an expression of religious belief. And so she brings all those other aspects of puppetry, combines it with this much more all-encompassing view of what puppetry can mean to a culture. And that has really informed everything she has done since then. Let's see. She also had professional training with major theater artists in London, Paris, and New York, which meant that she also came from a professional theater background as well, which isn't always true. She joined UNIMA-USA as a charter member in 1966, and she finally met Sergei Obraztsov personally for the first time in 1971 when he attended an UNIMA meeting at the Puppeteers of America Festival in Nashville. And she actually helped arrange for him to perform his solo show, which had not been previously arranged. So right there, all of a sudden, she's making these connections across the waters. And again, remember, this is not a time when connections with the Soviet Union were at all easy to establish, but Nancy did it on a one-by-one, person-by-person layer. Now, this is a great quote of hers I really like. UNIMA-USA opens its doors for its members to the international community of puppeteers, many of whom become close friends. Publications, festivals, and meetings bring people together to share their love of puppetry and to open their hearts to the message of peace and understanding through the art form. It certainly did that for me. In 1974, Nancy directed the National Puppeteers of America PFA Festival in New Orleans, having had very limited experience with festival organizing because she was busy raising a family. In 1975, when Jim Henson, who was then the president of UNIMA-USA, arranged to have a meeting at the Detroit Institute of the Arts for those interested in puppetry to see what the possibilities were, Nancy joined as the P of A representative. And at that meeting, Jim Henson proposed hosting the 1980 UNIMA 13th Congress in the US, hoping to give Americans what was then a rare opportunity to experience the richness of professional puppetry from outside of the US. As a result of Jim's suggestion, UNIMA-USA's council members, joined by Nancy, traveled to the 1976 Congress in Moscow, where they successfully bid to host the 1980 Congress in Washington, D.C. So when she returned to New Orleans, Nancy studied grantsmanship and subsequently, at Jim Henson's invitation, became the executive director of the 1980 World Puppetry Festival at the John F. Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. So as a result of this, between June 8th and 15th, 1980, 50 performances took place in 10 different venues in DC. And I should say, my presentation today is based on an article that I did for Puppetry Research International, and all the links to Nancy's articles where she goes into detail about this story are there. So I highly, highly recommend it. Nancy also organized the Corcoran Gallery exhibit, Puppets, Art, and Entertainment, which subsequently toured to 11 additional venues across the United States and was seen by about 3 million attendees. So again, not something that had happened before. Now, one of the things that Nancy points out is that as a result of this very public recognition of puppetry, the NEA began officially recognizing puppetry in their funding guidelines as a distinct art form, and that has had a huge effect on the ability to fund puppet artists since then. Talking with Jim and Jane Henson, she made suggestions which led to the establishment of the Jim Henson, well, helped lead to the establishment of the Jim Henson Foundation in 1982, which of course has provided absolutely invaluable financial support for presentations and festivals, the New York festivals, right up to the present day under the executive direction of Cheryl Henson. Now, one of the most important gifts to puppetry in the United States, and Nancy sees this as being her personal, what she considers to be her personal legacy, is her work alongside Vincent Anthony in establishing the Museum of World Puppetry at the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta. The museum's holdings originally were based on Nancy's own extensive personal collections, which she had at the Puppet Playhouse. And it began when she said she began rescuing puppets from decorators and trash collectors. I love that quote. When she left the Playhouse in order to begin work on the World Puppetry Festival in 1980, she went ahead and donated her collection of about 150 puppets to what was then the new Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta. Since then, the collection has grown to 2,415 as of April of 2024. Her priority has always been to obtain functional stage-worthy examples, preferably those that have actually been used in performance. And as you can see here, in 2015, a new building was built to house the center's growing collection. The Worlds of Puppetry Museum now includes both the global collection and the Jim Henson collection, the latter a generous gift of the family of the famous performer and filmmaker. As the collection has increased, she has continued to stress the importance of keeping detailed records regarding the figures. She is, in her heart, very much a scholar and researcher. Documentation is essential, as she says. Despite the best efforts of restoration experts, puppets have a limited lifespan. Like people, they disintegrate. Oh, sorry. As of 2023, the Nancy Staub Research Library at the Center for Puppetry Arts, also named in her honor, contains materials in multiple languages, including thousands of books, video recordings, associated ephemera, many of which she donated. The collection includes items going back to 1871, with most dating from around 1960 forward. Often called upon as a consultant, Nancy's reputation is truly international. 2012, she was a performance judge for the 21st UNIMA Congress and World Puppetry Festival in Chengdu, China. She's published her research extensively, over 60 publications, which is just amazing, and has been a research consultant for the Center UNIMA in France, the Institut International de la Marionnette, which I'm sure I'm mangling. She has participated extensively as presenter, moderator, organizer for puppetry-related scholarly conferences, including 2 futurism conferences in 1990, 1991, and the notes on that are just fascinating. And she was also one of the original 5 editors for UNIMA's World Encyclopedia of Puppetry Arts, the WEPA, now online. She has also been named as an UNIMA International Member of Honor. Finally, in 2023, UNIMA-USA established and presented the first Nancy Staub Awards, again named in her honor, as a way to identify and reward scholars doing research in the field of puppetry. So definitely look into that. Nancy came from a theater background, and so as a result, she never loses sight as puppetry as an important performing art, even when that performance has ceremonial purposes. And she wrote extensively on the use of puppetry in Native American performance at a time when it was very hard to find that information. The purpose of her writing is to communicate puppetry's importance to readers in ways that are clear and accessible. She's been especially interested in puppetry as practiced in Japan, the Bunraku-za of Japan, India, and by Native Americans, writing essays on each. She continually strives to increase her knowledge on all aspects of puppetry, including contemporary practice. I'd like to quote Steve Abrams here. "The work of Nancy Lohman-Staub has raised the standard and consciousness of puppetry in the United States and abroad. Puppeteers on every continent value her friendship, her curiosity, her quiet optimism, and keen intelligence." And then what I'd like to do is end with her own quote, that there is virtually no culture without some form of puppetry. The historical significance of a particular tradition or artist is always a consideration. The ultimate goal is to demonstrate the universality underlining the diversity of puppetry, and through it, humanity itself. And thank you very much.
Okay. I'm going to take over. Hopefully you can see me. I'm going to do a screen share. Let's pull this up. Okay. So I have Carol Sterling, again, someone who probably a number of people on this call know in ways that are bound by friendship, by workshops, whatever. I'm going to try to speed through a very extensive career, and then we'll call Carol on at the end. So I apologize in advance if I make any mistakes, and I'm sure Carol will set me right. This again was to enter into WEPA, and also it will be coming out in a PI that is focusing on women in puppetry, because the original WEPA is a wonderful work, but because of it being published in print, there were not as many of our people as perhaps there were the French, who of course was funding it. But now that we're online and working together, we hope to fill in those gaps. So this is called Hitting Home Runs: From Babe Ruth on the Ball Field to Arts Content Standards at the White House. So she began her art career at the High School of Performing Arts in New York, got her BA at Barnard, went to the Teachers College at Columbia, one of the best places in the country that is intertwined with the history of puppetry in the libraries from the 1920s and 1930s on. Carol herself didn't know she was interested in puppetry until she started hitting the classroom. She did a puppetry project. It worked. A newspaper man was looking for something that would be a good picture on a Saturday, took a picture of her, and she found her way to us. So this is going to be about her becoming a puppetry educator in 5 steps, not 12 steps, only takes 5. She found her place: puppetry guilds, P of A festivals, find your mentors, at the festivals, or in the guild. Go local, make work. Go national, have impact, advocacy for the arts. Reminding people in the educational system that creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, cross-cultural knowledge, all of this can come to our students via puppetry. And, of course, write about it, document it. And then, of course, doing all of that nationally, she went international. So her tribe was a picture in a newspaper, caused someone who was head of a puppetry or member of a puppetry program to give her a phone call and invite her to the guild. She's become a very important part of the New York City, Greater New York Puppetry Guild. And you see many of the people who some of you may know, or some of you may be down there. When she went to the guild meeting, people were asking or talking about a festival, a national festival, which was taking place in 1970 at UConn. Of course, it was there because Frank Ballard had established his puppetry program there, and Carol Spinney was being the artistic director. So that meant that Jim Henson was going to be there. Julie Tamer had just come back from her first travels, seeing puppetry around the world. And in the context of those festivals, Carol started to find her mentors. The most important for her was Nancy Renfro, who many of you have probably seen some of these publications, but you may not realize that her archive is down at the University of Texas, Austin. You can write a grant to go and take a look at it and share her wider artistic views. She was working in Connecticut at the time, and therefore Carol had the opportunity to see her a lot. Other mentors that Carol mentions are, of course, Alalu Curtin, Jim Henson, who, along with Nancy Staub, helped found UNIMA-USA and begin a great internationalization of American puppetry that through that 1980 festival started really to happen. If any of you were lucky enough to be there, it was mind opening and arts opening and crossed borders that were up because of the Cold War. So you can go listen to her podcast where she talks a little bit about that. So those are mentors, and Carol, being Carol, immediately started putting that knowledge to work in classrooms, in workshops with teachers. In 1976 was her first large puppetry project. It was for the American Bicentennial, and at Yankee Field, they were doing something about the greats in baseball. She worked at a high school of technology and science. The principal thought the students were wasting their time with this project until he sat in Yankee Stadium with a full house and saw how proud all of his students were and how much they had learned about the things the bicentennial was about, thinking about history, the past, the greats, work ethic, communication, culture, all of those things through building these puppets. Soon after, working with Carol Fidjian, she was on TV, WABC. She also did Shalom Corner, which is a cable TV program, 13 episodes on Jewish heritage. Having seen, someone must have seen those great puppets walking around Yankee Stadium. She was down at the Spoleto Festival in one of its first years, creating giant puppets that pulled the community together, which gave them a vision of how the arts operate in culture. These are some of the places that she worked: the State Department of Education, largely educating educators about how to use the arts within their curriculum planning, to get students engaged, enrich their learning, empower them to be creative. Then arts partners for the New York City Board of Education. One of the projects that she did on that was a workbook about creativity called You Can Paint the Sky. And she, of course, managed to get Jim Henson to be one of the featured performers, bringing everyone's consciousness to how creativity and puppetry interface in creating contemporary culture. She was director of arts education for the American Council for the Arts. It's now called Americans for the Arts. I'll talk about it again. And of course, the Brooklyn Arts Council, which is bringing artists into the schools. She, is part of the people that she helped have workshops and teaching and other things within the school, are sort of a who's who of some of the New York puppetry area. Gretchen Van Lent, Ronnie Wasserston, Kevin Augustine, Teresa Linneman, Jean Catherine Shaw, and so many others. She was doing all the arts, but she made sure that puppetry was there. She joined boards. It's been on the board for a long time. A Penny Jones company, which of course does puppetry in early childhood education. Again, one of the early pathfinders within the educational puppetry field. She gives personal workshops for teachers, for youth, for high school students, for seniors. These are just some of the images from those. You can see giant, small self-portraits. It's the community engagement, the working together on a project. But of course, she didn't stop at the local. She went national, especially through Americans for the Arts. And it was that group coming together during the Clinton administration, which created a 1994 law that suddenly got the attention of everyone in the country. It was the first time that the arts really had state standards started to be written in, and actual funding, beyond an individual principal liking the idea of arts. And it is this kind of nitty-gritty writing. Go look at the goals for the arts and all of the thing. It's mandatory reading for anyone who's using the arts in education to think about how you can build communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, cross-cultural knowledge, all of the things. And then, of course, being Carol, she could sell it to the CEOs of companies in the Silicon Valley kind of types, explaining why the arts are really important. They're not Friday afternoon entertainment. One of the ways she's continued on about it is writing. And she always demands of, all her mentees and herself of writing up so that people understand the impact that puppetry and these projects can have. Most recently, there's the Nancy Staub Award for Publication, was established 2 years ago. And it is basically because of Carol, making sure that we're covering not just the arts puppetry, that last year we started awarding on, how puppets can be used in autism, puppetry in education. That went from a book by Joanna Smith, Pretending Early Childhood mind development. So including that research material is really important. She serves on the Puppetry in Education and Therapy Commission, or group within Puppeteers of America. Did a podcast or Zoom upon it. And the group, of course, is led by Joanna Smith right now. But, and it preaches, document what you're doing. Make sure that you do a pre and a post assessment of student learning to show that the arts have impact. She keeps hoping and looking for the graduate students who can do theses that document and present the data of what we all know is true, that these kinds of engagement are wonderful learning opportunities. So join that group if you're not already a member. Look it up on the Puppeteers of America page. Go to their workshops at the festival. She makes sure that everybody covers the puppetry. For example, when little Amal was here, of course, it was Carol Sterling who was helping the New York puppeteers move that puppet, and then appearing in the newspapers. This is from the Spirit. It's about social awareness. Puppetry is an art form, not just for entertainment, but for educational purpose, and hopefully positive social change. She got the Puppeteers of America Award, both for in the past being a president of Puppeteers in America, but for all this other advocacy and work that we're talking about. And of course, she has not stopped at the national. She goes global and gets us all to follow. From going out to Japan in 1988, when there was the World Festival of Puppetry in Japan, and doing workshops all over Japan. And maybe, I don't know if she plans to come to Korea, but she's been to many festivals in the past. And those of you who are interested in getting hooked up with the Puppetry in Education and Therapy Commission might think about coming and seeing the great puppetry that will be going on, but knowing the people across the world. This is Livia Coughlin, who is the current head of the Education Development and Therapy Commission. If you just Google UNIMA International, you'll find out about it, what events they're doing, what kinds of things you can do on Zoom. Carol, of course, has been a Fulbright specialist in Uganda and India, building those large puppets that bring history, community engagement and thinking together in 2023. She was out again in Thailand, and she is currently, once again, a Fulbright specialist. At the last Puppeteers of America festival, she was up there leading a panel with all these Chad Williams, Anna Sobel, Claudia Ornstein, sharing how you too out there should be applying for a Fulbright and getting them to pay for you to go and share your puppetry skills around the world as you learn from people in other places. So these are just some places that she keeps on posting. So I mean, just go to www.carolsterling.net. If you have questions, email her. She will answer quickly. Or think about looking at the episode of Under the Puppet, where she talks much more expansively and intelligently than I have in this last few minutes about Carol, who keeps on contributing and giving to puppetry and to educational puppetry, locally, nationally, internationally. So I want to call Carol on the screen in case she has anything she wants to say. I have to stop sharing.
Hi. Thanks, Kathy. It's great to be on the program, and I look forward to helping and encouraging people who are working in school settings or after-school settings to join us by documenting what you are doing. Let us know the impact that you're having on children's social and emotional skills, on creativity and critical thinking and compassion and communication and cross-cultural awareness, because those are the skills that we need for the 21st century workforce. And if we can make more and more people aware of the role of puppetry as an educational tool, we will provide many more opportunities for student learning and love of the art form that brings us together as a community. So please give me questions in the chat and I'll be happy to correspond with everybody. Thank you. And thank you, Kathy.
Okay, I want to call Brad and Will back on the screen. And Carol can stay there because we're going to look at the questions. First, we'll be looking at the Q&A, since I think I said at the beginning, that's where we go to. And then we'll comb through the chat. And these may be comments from people as well. I want to go to them since we only have a little time left. So Aretta Gartner, sorry, Aretta, says, thank you for this. I've always heard that Ellen von Bokenberg coined the term puppeteer. I'm glad to hear that the research bears this out. What did we call puppeteers before that as a default? Puppeteers, actors, puppet artists, thanks. Do you know, Will, what before we were called puppeteers? Who were we?
Sure. Some examples of terms that were used in English were figure workers. Showman was used quite a bit. But yeah, puppeteer definitely kind of marks the transition from this general kind of entertainment, showman, charismatic person to someone that's actually working with the puppet object itself.
Okay. If anyone has on screen has anything to add, please chime in. The next thing within the question says, this is from India. Who knew? We are seeking talented and passionate puppeteers to collaborate with us on the first ever puppet theater in Mumbai. This is a unique opportunity to be part of an innovative project that brings the art of puppetry to life in a vibrant cultural space. If you have the skills, creativity to contribute to this exciting adventure, we'd love to hear from you. So
That's amazing. I was just in Mumbai a few weeks ago to see Dadi Padamji's performances, so we may have been in the same place.
Yeah, India is very active, both within its longer history, but within contemporary work. And have you gone to any of Dadi's festivals, Brad? You might mention if you know when it is.
Yatra, in 2003. In fact, you published my article on it in ATJ, but that's the only one that I've been able to go to.
Yeah, but there's a regular festival. And once again, if you want to be associated with India, Carol, how did you end up doing a Fulbright in India?
I was in contact with Dadi Pumanji, who is the president of UNIMA-USA at the time. No, I'm sorry, he was president of UNIMA International. And his puppet company, which is called Ishara Puppet Trust, was my host institution. And he and that organization coordinated my visitation to 5 cities. Now, the Fulbright program has changed since I did it in 2015. Now, I would have to find an institution that is like a graduate school of education, and they have to recommend me. But if anybody has any questions about becoming a Fulbrighter, please email me, and I'll be happy to respond to all of your questions. I put my email in the chat, csterling646@gmail.com, because I want to encourage everybody who's with us today to think about if timing is good for you at this point in your life, for you to be able to take some time and leave whatever your home responsibilities are, consider doing a Fulbright. It will be an opportunity for you to share your skills with people in other countries and to increase the number of people around the world who will understand the power of puppetry, not just as an educational or a theatrical tool, but as a tool of friendship. And as we see now that we have the internet, it's a much bigger world that we can embrace in our own way. It's a wonderful way of connecting with people on a personal and a professional level. So don't be shy. Email me and I'll help you get started.
Thank you, Carol. We have a correction here. It's Frank Ballard's dates. He died at 80 years old, 1929 to 2010. Don't always believe what you get when you Google. Thank you for the correction, Richard Tremaine. This is from Lauren Linkhauser. What resources do we have in place for puppeteers that are trying to incorporate more puppetry arts into educational settings? Carol, do you want to take that? I'd say look at
I would like to refer people to Johanna Smith and the Puppetry in Education and Therapy subgroup of Puppeteers of America. Please go to the Puppeteers of America website, click on Puppetry in Education and Therapy, and ask Johanna if she can give you some specifics, because this is a cohort of really dedicated puppeteers who are working in educational and therapeutic sessions. A lot is happening. And I want the person who wrote that question to get it directly from Johanna, because she has her pulse on all of the opportunities that are out there. But as a general rule, I just want to encourage everybody, document what you are doing as an educational puppeteer or as a performing puppeteer. Please submit your articles to Puppetry Journal, submit them to Puppetry International, submit them to Puppeteers of America and UNIMA-USA and beyond. Put them on the internet, on the websites. This is the way in which we get the word out.
Carol, I'm going to break in because the next question deals with what you're talking about. It says, it came out a bit, but I'd like the presenters to say how they connected with this opportunity to talk about their assignments. How did you choose these people, or how did they choose you? What makes them, in a sentence or two, an inspiration to you? So let's start with Will, and then Brad, and then I'll go.
Great. Yeah, so this project with Valkenburg actually began as a class project of mine in a class on the history of directing. We needed to pick a production and then write a reconstruction of it, do some historical archival research. And so I chose Valkenburg's Midsummer Night's Dream to do a reproduction of that. And I turned to WEPA originally to find some more information on Valkenburg and found that there was no entry for her on that page whatsoever. And so once the class project was done, at the advice of my advisor, she said to maybe consider turning that into some sort of WEPA entry and expand it further, and to make sure that that information is readily accessible and out there. As far as what makes them an inspiration to me, I find a lot of what Valkenburg did quite inspirational. I mean, she was an excellent person at bringing together a community of fellow puppeteers and fellow people that really enjoyed puppetry but had no idea what they were doing, and never really lost faith, and just trying again until they stumbled upon something that really stuck and was really impactful. And I find that perseverance pretty remarkable.
Brad?
Well, the short answer is it was Nancy. And I adore Nancy, and any chance to actually, look into her writings and her life was very exciting. Claudia Orenstein, the editor of Puppetry Research International, really was the person who started this project because we were doing a series of articles on the founders of our field. And so she asked me to do Nancy. And I really kind of after a certain degree of insecurity, because it's such an amazing life and career, I did kind of jump into it, and Nancy herself was very, very cooperative and very, very giving and sharing of her own perceptions and her own life and photographs that I certainly had never seen before. So I do encourage you to take a look at the article because it goes into more detail than I was able to go to in such a short talk. But it really comes down to it's Nancy. She's just a remarkable, remarkable human being. And I wanted to learn more about her than I'd been able to get from our friendship over the last 20 years or so.
I want to acknowledge that we're up to the hour. We'll probably go about 10 minutes more so we can collect some of these other questions. But any of you who have to leave, I know it's dinner time and the East Coast. It's time to go out for your last gas of the afternoon in the West Coast. I will say that I was president of UNIMA-USA when Paulette Richards pointed out during the Black Lives Matter movement how certain people were missing, and of course she pointed out that many of them were either women or people of color. She was on the board and thought that something should happen. Karen Smith was also on WEPA at the time, so we put our heads together and said, well, some people are teaching classes on some of these individuals. Maybe we could get graduate students to do some of their, college papers as a beginning on these. And then if they haven't already talked, as we hoped, to those who are living or gotten to the archive, as Will seems to have done, add on a little bit. They get a publication. UNIMA gets information. Carol was on the list primarily because she just got the service award and something, first we did a series of puppeteers of color, and then people were saying, well, what about the women, or things like that. And Carol was high on the list because she just got the service award. So I said, okay. And she also has part of the history of puppetry in education since the 1970s to now is really bound up with her story, how standards were established, how you can create organizations. So we're trying to fill in those gaps, but also tell a really important story that we hope other people want to read and say, hey, I can connect with this and I can move the goalpost even further so we see more puppetry. And as a very least, it documents some of the history that you can have when you're talking to Carol, but not everybody knows. It can lead them to the people who will guide them in the future. So this says, would you, this is Marcian de Vilis. If you would give advice to your younger self, what would it be? Whoa. Will, you're young. You won't have to think too long.
I like this one. I would say more languages, or, any language well, and better sewing.
Will, you got anything on that one?
That's a tricky question. I mean, I guess maybe just don't be afraid to seem silly or to try to go out, and don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. Just give it a shot.
Something that I'd say is join. You can move further, meet more people if you join UNIMA. Be on the board. You may have to do a little work, but you start to have connections. go to something like the World Puppetry Festival. If you are interested in international connections, and you might find the person who says, yeah, I will sponsor you in my place if you want to apply for a Fulbright. They will probably say they can't fund you, but just get out there and do it earlier is what I would say to my younger self. Don't wait and say, oh, I was so stupid when I was young. Do it now, lay the groundwork. Carol, what would you say?
I wanted to reinforce something about my younger self. When I became an art teacher, I was working in a rural community in Tompkins County, New York, and I just said to the other teachers that I was going to work with, how can I help you teach the curriculum? I wanted to build a relationship with each person. And I would say, what are you teaching in science? And they'd say, we're teaching insects. Oh, I'd say, would you be okay with me doing insects as an art project? And they'd say, sure. Anyhow, what happened is I'd start doing insect puppets. Or what are you teaching in social studies? Oh, we're teaching American history. Oh, and who are the people? The point that I'm making is I wanted to build a friendship with each teacher so that he, she, or they could feel like I was really their partner. So I think that was one of the best things that happened, because I was making them look good and they were increasing student learning, and it was a win-win. So that's my pitch. Become a real ally of the people that you're working with, and you're both going to win.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I ended up, because of that 1994 law, being in charge of a fairly large program at the University of California, where we were sending 30 or 40 students out into the schools and trying to get them to understand how they could be doing science illustration, or a play that brought these historical figures together and built collaborations with middle schools and high schools, where it was really engaged learning for the students, and then they could perform it for their parents or whatever. So you can't believe how excited the students would get, the parents would get, the siblings would get, the principals would get, when they would see these very large days where people were passionate about the curriculum, but also the wonderful images they created of puppets, masks, music, all those other things. So it's how we gain additional advocacy for the arts. Okay, I think we're through the questions and answers. The chat have wonderful things, thanking Brad. It's an honor to be here. People are going to check out Carol's episode in what others in her website. Fabulous presentations. Thank you, whoever wrote that. Here's one. I'm a puppeteer teacher from Iran, a solo full-time traveler artist. I'm going to Baghdad. I am ready for collaborations. Much love. Working across some of the boundaries that politics have put up, the example that Brad talked about of Nancy connecting with Russia, there are wonderful people in Iran, and UNIMA Iran is, I believe, the largest UNIMA organization, national organization in the world. Brad?
Oh, I was just going to say, I had a great experience in the Soviet Union. It was within a year of the end of the Soviet Union. And I was in this, I think I was in Pskov, and I saw a puppet theater, and I just sort of put my head in the door to see if there was anything there. Within minutes, women came down, grabbed me, pulled me up to the top floor, brought me a big bowl of borscht, because I was a puppet guy. And I had maybe 3 words, but I was able to identify as a puppet guy, and that's what happens.
Yeah, and the puppeteers in Iran are wonderful people. The history, it's extremely lively because if women can appear on stage themselves, they can do puppetry. So you'll find all kinds of things that are going on, and making friends via puppetry, understanding the world can make it a more connected and less divisive space.
I would add, because there are local UNIMA, most countries do have an UNIMA website. And if you can contact directly, very often they can put you in touch with people as well. It varies, obviously, but it's a good place to start if you're going to a new place and don't know anyone.
Okay, here's a comment from Dr. Joanne Bizzini. My research also brought forth the data that older adult groups rehab were more anxious about using puppet therapy, and they also chose puppet therapy over and above regular therapy. I desire to bring forth more research to validate both puppet therapy and therapeutic puppetry. Carol, do you want to, you've worked with older puppeteers as well. Do you want to comment on that?
It was a little hard for me to get it. Can you just paraphrase what Joanne said?
Puppetry with older adults
Right.
can be something that they choose more quickly and ends up being more therapeutic. We hope that the person who wrote this message is writing up her research. We want to help see it in PI or Puppetry International Research. It's exactly the sort of thing that we know from individual things is true.
Okay.
So do you have any comments of working especially with older adults?
Okay. I had the pleasure of teaching a puppetry class for the New York City Chinatown organization. And I had recently come back from China, and I was a teaching artist with the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. And none of my participants spoke English, even though these women were in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. They had emigrated from China when they were teenagers, but they lived in Chinatown. So they didn't know any English because they got jobs in Chinatown. But I had 2 interpreters, a Mandarin and a Cantonese interpreter. And we did marvelous Chinese shadow puppets that I had just learned a lot about when I was in China. And if you go to my website, www.carolsterling.net, you will see a lot of photos. They were so open to it. They were so delighted to not only learn something new about their own culture, but it was a very emancipating kind of experience. And they spoke in their own language, and they celebrated a tradition that they did not really know about. So I agree that it is a very welcoming art form to work with people who are perhaps not accustomed to doing, craft before, but it was very successful. So I encourage people, if you are in an opportunity to be a teaching artist, to work with seniors, consider where they come from. What is their cultural background? What connections can you make using the culture, the countries that they come from? Because if you look at our traditions in puppetry, you're going to find that almost every country has a tradition. Learn about it, and then try and incorporate that into the pedagogy that you teach.
Okay, we're going to have one last very brief thing, even though we're over time. But before I say anything, I want to really thank all of you who presented today. I want to thank all of you who listened. I want to encourage you to join UNIMA, to join us in this historization. I hope to see many of the people who are now participants, as they write up their favorite figure from the past so that we can get it into French and Spanish and get it on WEPA. But the other thing that I should say is this is for everyone. We love puppetry. You learn from your history. I had the opportunity to learn a lot more about Carol because I had this assignment that we'd given ourselves from WEPA. It will be a publication that is coming out in the Puppetry International, and then we flip it over into World Encyclopedia of Puppetry Arts. So those of you who are thinking about academia or things like that, you will have served Carol's thing to document and write about it. Because again, that builds the support for what we do. The last question we're going to take, and I have no idea what the answer is, how is AI impacting our field? This would be a great future Zoom. I don't know if anyone here has thoughts on it, but chime in.
I have to say, because I teach design, and a good part of design is visual research, I have a somewhat different perception of what AI may be capable of doing. Obviously, the part of AI which steals work from artists is evil and bad. But the part of AI which takes a variety of visual stimulus and combines it in interesting new ways. I know there's a Czech artist, a Czech individual who's been doing a whole series of folkloric, very eerie folkloric imagery using AI, and they're extraordinary. So I'm not quite as much, I have concerns about it. I think it's here, it's a tool, it's going to be like any other tool. It can be used for good or for evil, but I think it's here to stay.
Will, you have any?
I really don't have too much to speak on that. I don't know enough about AI to really weigh in, but it's like Brad was pointing to, it seems like it's gonna be sticking around for a while.
Yeah. I think it will stick around. It reminds me, I lived near the Silicon Valley, and I remember when they started coming over with these big masks and virtual reality, and everybody from Google and Apple, who were, our graduate students coming back, was talking about how this was going to change the universe, bring world peace. Everything was going to be different. I think AI is probably the same. When I deal with my students, I say, don't believe everything you read on the internet, especially when I see that sometimes I am quoted as the authority about Okinawan Kumiodori, and I know how little I know. Things like that. So it will impact, we'll find good ways to use it, and we'll probably find evil ways to rip things off and avoid really thinking or doing the kind of thing that Will did. Go to the archive, go to the people, go to the event, see it with your own eyes too. Carol?
Okay, I just wanted to comment on AI. I was very curious to see what I would get when I typed in for AI, what are the benefits of puppetry in education? And I got a laundry list of about 10 ideas. They were okay. I mean, they were kind of bland, but to me, unless you experience it, it doesn't have the emotional or the pedagogical impact. But, and that's why I feel like it's really important there has to be a personal connection between an art form and whatever, you're doing. So I think that we have to monitor what AI is doing and, double check and make sure that if we see something that seems superficial or incorrect or off base, write and contact the organization and make suggestions on how it can be improved and much more academically and emotionally accurate. So we have a responsibility as people who care deeply about our reputation in the puppetry community to make sure that they're getting it right. So be advocates.
Great. Thank you to everyone who talked. Thank you to everyone who listened. Do come for our next Zoom event. We'll put AI on the one to be in the future, but we may have human beings that actually talk about the AI. Then they're replicated AI doing the presentations. Join UNIMA. Tell us what you think. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you to Sara.
Thank
Sara
you.
Burmenko at Center for Puppetry Arts.
Thank you,
We love
Sarah, the Center for Puppetry Arts, Kathy Foley.
Bye, everybody. Bye.